It has been a long day, and to all of you who stayed on, really thank you a lot for that. You are the brave hearts of today. And trying to sort of collect what has been said today is really, really hard. I sort of felt like being in one of these movies that are played in fast forward, you know, like you try to hold on to some thought or something that came up, and then it's like the next thing popping up. So, but nevertheless, I try to provide my panel and also you as the audience with some of the topics that have been discussed today and some of the tensions that we have addressed. And then for this session, actually, I'd like to sort of focus a bit more on relations, because we've talked a lot about conflicts, antagonisms, tensions, and I think it's good to end with talking about relations and networks, connections. So, questions that we have addressed today, first of all, was about cultural policy itself, whether is it marginal or marginalized compared to other policy fields that might seem more important, or on the other hand, is it actually the most powerful policy in terms of its power to actually create communities and to act as a powerful tool for representation. Another topic that has been discussed was culture policy actors and processes that are nowadays usually labeled as governance, where we have just in the last sessions we had talked about the change from the state as the center of power to more networking governance processes, negotiations with public actors and civil society and economy. And again, it's about power and resources and influence of shaping culture policy in its instruments, contents, and about a responsibility and functions in decision making. Then we have talked about questions about the construction and mapping and image creation and discourses about peripheries and centers. And on the other hand, as you presented this morning, the very real and physical and even life-threatening frontiers that define centers and peripheries. So moving on from this sort of dichotomies to more relations, I'd like to focus on the questions how to create contact points and communicative platforms, actually, as you said, hubs of communications where we can negotiate things, because it has been said, I think it was Therese Kaufmann who said that things need to be negotiated, and if consensus is probably the worst thing that could happen to culture policy, because it ends up in totalitarianism, and there's no more participation possible if there's no critical opinion allowed. So my question would be, how do we, or how do policymakers or other actors, how do we move on from conflicts and antagonisms to creating communicative settings and networks? Do you have any ideas on that? Maybe Christian, you are maybe the freshest because you had the longest break.
Well, can I pass on my turn at this point and maybe see if someone else is fresher? Because I don't immediately, I can start blabbering on, but I don't have anything meaningful that comes to mind.
Oh, yeah, I'm very sorry. I haven't introduced you. You are, of course, a new person on board. You're Christine Böhler. You're the founding director of the culture program of Erste Foundation. So you are representing a private partner for culture policy. And I'm sure you will talk a bit about Erste Foundation and what you're doing mainly in the neighboring countries. And you are actually one of those people who could create contact points and communicative settings crossing borders.
Yeah, so now I lost the small glimpse of your former question. Thanks for the introduction and thanks for being here. And finally, now I'm super fresh and I can give you all the solutions that you're looking for. And I was very happy that actually today, during the day and now towards the end, we changed from dichotomy to kind of network or moving things, which is not so much putting things into a position which is away, but which is more in contact. You mentioned this word contact, and I have to say that yes, I was in funding all my professional life, more or less. Also before I went to the foundation, I was doing that, and I also believe that curating is funding in a way. So this was also said that only if you do exclusion, you can do inclusion, because you will never set up an exhibition or do a book or do whatever if you don't say no to others. So this is also a question of periphery, of course. So it's also a question of this thing which we were trying to talk about today, or which we talked about out of all different perspectives. And I had some time yesterday after a week which I spent in Venice in a group dynamics setting, to reflect out of this recent perspective on this thing we are talking about today, this periphery. And I have to say I'm not at all into periphery to take it as a point to start the discussion, because what has been said, Elke was very much talking about it, and it has been said by various people, and it triggers a lot of things, but I would rather talk about standpoints and about autonomy and about authenticity. I think you brought it in first, which is to be also authentic in the gesture of giving. Means if you are a funder, be it private or be it public, to kind of play open your cards, you know, to say this is what I want, this is what I do not want. And I know that this might sound romantic now, but in my life, in my professional life, there were many examples where you could see how fast also in the art field, and I'm very much right now, I used to work with the contemporary art field, mainly in Eastern Europe, and how a standpoint in the periphery, if you take an example from Ukraine, an NGO we have been working with for years, the Visual Cultural Center in Kiev. They are kind of famous now because there's the war, there's Putin, there was the jet which crashed, and now they got the Princess Margaret Award, which is great, and it's really perfect for them. But I also followed how they went on for years without any open discourse around them, without any recognition, being kicked out of the university where they had a small exhibition space because they were kind of, you know, scratching and not very nice. So in the end, through a different standpoint on the international agenda, they managed to be in the focus. Bluff, you know. Maidan made a big chance. It also gave me, I'm not working for Erste Foundation anymore, but at that time it gave me the possibility to give them funding without asking for any program. You know, it was just, there is Maidan, people have started to talk, and it was so important to say, go on talking, you just have a space and you talk. So this shift of perspective also made it possible. And I think what is also the most important thing in this whole thing of periphery standpoint and being able to speak is the power relation which comes up if you speak, the power relation which comes up if you give funding or if you give possibilities, and how you are able to listen, to really listen to people and to try to understand and to try to digest and to try, if you have this power position. And you have this power position if you are funding, if you are white, if you are man, if you are, all those different aspects of periphery, margin, center. But in the end, if you give the other a way of talking without having fear, then you can make his periphery a periphery which is a standpoint. Because you act out of a periphery. I think it's a gesture, and I think it's quite important because it gives energy. I think it's in the way, it's a creative act, especially if you talk about arts.
Thank you. I think you made it very clear that it's quite easy to call upon institutions, you have to do, you have to create, but actually it's about individual attitudes, how you encounter, how you enter into dialogue. And I'd like to ask you, Christian, because you made decisions in your academic career not to go like the beaten track, Erasmus is easy to go abroad, but you went to countries like Burkina Faso and Ghana. And why have you made these decisions, and what brought you there? What supported you in going there as well?
Yeah, whatever works. No, what got me there is actually it was basically a consternation about a paradox that I saw in the way we framed the role of cultural and creative industries. Because before the first UNCTAD Creative Economy report came out that really was very positive about the potential of that sector for so-called developing countries, I had been going to WOMEX, the World Music Expo, that travels throughout Europe, and not really beyond Europe, but throughout Europe, as one of the prime markets for so-called world music. And what really struck me there is that the music effectively came from all over the world. That wasn't the problem. But the representatives of these musicians came primarily from Europe and North America. Granted, there were important exceptions to that. It wasn't exclusively from these regions, but the majority of them came from there. And having that observation and having that contrasted with this very optimistic sense that, okay, there is something that is going to help these developing countries, the countries in the periphery, to become part of that center in cultural terms, based on the economic potential of the sector, really struck me. Because if you look at the value chain of how, particularly in music, how that is organized, if only the artist remains in their country of origin, if they even do that, but they record their album somewhere in Paris or London, they have their record label, they have their publisher, and they have their marketing agent, and they have their booking agent, all based somewhere in Europe or the United States, then the vast chunk, the big chunk of the value creation is not going to that so-called periphery. And that is the tension that I really wanted to explore, because if you're saying that the cultural industries are going to support and reinforce the cultural sector of that periphery, then you have to look beyond what is created, but it's about how the sector is organized. And that's, I think, connects very much to what Malaika has been saying today, that the infrastructure, both in terms of policies, but also in terms of physical infrastructure, is something that is very much, straining that bringing back that value creation within a local context. And you see that you have some exceptions. The much quoted exception of Nollywood, which is exactly that. It's an exception. It's something that you don't see all around the world. It's something that people always turn to, oh yes, Nollywood. Yeah, the book publishing industry in Buenos Aires, which has now moved more or less to Bogota. But you have a few pockets of groups, of networks that work reasonably well. But I hope in a sense that when we're reshifting these things, and that's also why I try to really understand how that discourse of cultural creative industries is influencing the actual cultural policies and the way the sector is organized, in order to improve what is actually happening, not to impose an alien idea, not to say that what exists is bad, but to say, how can that idea that has been somewhat successful in the so-called center, how can that influence what is going on, and how can that improve what is going on in the periphery to make it work? Because that's also supposedly, and I'll round up with that, that's also supposedly the real core of the 2005 UNESCO Convention, where you have Article 16, if I'm not mistaken, which focuses on the preferential treatment of cultural products and of artists coming from so-called developing countries to enter markets of developed countries. But by virtue of framing it in that exact way, it's actually really, again, just making that distinction between these two groups of countries that is in fact very fuzzy, but it reinforces that distinction, which it actually tries to overcome. And I think that's something that is, I think, very central to trying to deal with oppositional forces, is that if you want to make things more equitable, then you have to be able to call them out. But by calling them out, at first sight, you actually make them less equal or less equitable.
It sounds like eventually it has been a very rational decision where you wanted to make your research, but I think always when it comes to mobility, there's also the question of where are you interested, and it's about, personal curiosity in a way before you move somewhere and you explore things. And I'd like to also ask you, Mr. Bast, being the head of a university in the center of Vienna, and you talked about this morning, but you also have a student body which is, I guess, largely diverse. People come here to study arts from all over the world. What attracts them to Vienna and to your university, and what can you offer them coming from, not only the peripheries of Austria, but also from other countries?
Well, actually, we have a student body which is not only very international. Some 1/3 of our students are non-Austrian students, but of course we also have students coming from all parts of Austria, so also from the periphery, if we want to use this term, although we already discussed in the morning that periphery also can be, if you have the right perspective, kind of a center. What attracts them is, of course, the concentration of culture, concentration of the arts, concentration of educational institutions here in Vienna, and the lack of similar institutions or similar options in the periphery, or at least the opportunities to collaborate, to have collaborative options with the center and periphery. I just want to tell you one example. We always, from time to time, we try to make this kind of collaborative projects. Our institutes for art pedagogy once tried 3 or 4 years ago with a high school in Tyrol to make a very unusual project with the support of teachers and students of our institute. We wanted to set up a project including disciplines like history, like art education, geography, economic knowledge, German literature, and similar things. dedicated to break out these little boxes of education we are used to have in the schools. We all prepared that with the single teachers at the school, and at the end, the peripheral center, the peripheral administrative center, which itself is dependent on the very center in Vienna, said no, this is not possible, this is not a project you could do, because you are not belonging to the school, and you are leaving the proper paths of high school education plans we have. So what I want to say, it's not easy because there is no culture of spreading culture, so to say, spreading things you have and knowledge and opportunities you have here in the center.
It's interesting that you said that there is an interest in cooperation, but the limits are actually put by policy, by categorizing and by sort of differentiating between belonging and not belonging. And I know that in the UK you have a lot of attempts to do actually cross-sectorial projects with the arts and education. Creative Partnerships has been a huge national project, which have sort of diminished in the last years. Maybe you want to comment on these policies, what has been behind them and how they functioned.
Yeah. So you mentioned Creative Partnerships, which was a government funded through the Arts Council of England, a project throughout the whole of the UK, bringing arts organisations and schools closer together so that they could work together, and bringing excluded young people back into school through the arts as well. Now that funding stream was completely cut about 5 years ago, and something else was set up which is called bridge organisations, which were firmly within arts organisations. And we were one of the associate bridges in London. I think the policy wasn't completely developed over the last few years, and it has been changed again, where there's just a number of organisations around the country which are going to come up with new ways of working between arts organisations and schools and further and higher education. I think there are some fantastic projects that have been achieved, some new theories about how to do things, new cultural policy coming out of that. And what it has enabled is that there's a legacy of independent arts organisations wanting to do more with young people, which is exactly what we champion.
Maybe I could just add to that, because I think they are not here anymore, the people from Periphery. Yeah. This was for me like they left. Yeah, because this was for me really the very impressive what they did, because what you said and what I tried to explain earlier, this act of speech, this speaking through fear, and by that being able to express yourself and also to create a creative really what they did, and what they stood for was really they just were there talking about high complicated issues, and it was super easy, and it was kind of to take away and to think, yes, this is just how it has to be. For education, I mean, it's always that one ends up talking about no money, no education, no possibilities. Even if you want to, you cannot, because there are certain rules which are kind of, it's, even if you could attempt this from institution to institution, then in the end it's hindered to do it. So for me, and I know them from various visits in Budapest, they do a great job, even in this very difficult situation which they face in Hungary. On the hot stone, but this act of speech, how they were there, I thought it was wonderful.
I talked a little bit about youth governance earlier, and I really believe this is so important. Lots of people say to me, well, aren't they terrified of talking, and should they be taking that kind of responsibility? And I took, 10 years ago, I took the trustee board of the Roundhouse on an away day to talk about involving young people in the governance of the organisation. And there are some people saying, well, we shouldn't show them the budgets, and they shouldn't talk about salaries. And slowly through the day, I just let them talk about it, give them the responsibility for making the decision that we would include 2 young people on the main board of trustees. We appointed them, and it was a revolution. It was brilliant, because you wouldn't have people, usually middle-aged or older, talking about the experience of their teenagers. The conversation stopped being what we're going to do for young people, and actually the conversation was we're having a conversation with young people. And that seems to be the most important thing for me in this kind of conversation, that if you want somebody to be on the periphery, or you want an organisation to be on the periphery, you don't talk to them. You don't involve them. You don't share power. For me, sharing a power is the most important thing, and I believe is the reason why we are proving quite successful at the moment, because we share power with those that use us. And my feeling is that if you made a statement at the last session, which was nearly a question but was a question, and I think about building institutions, it's about sharing power, and the more you can share power in decision making, the more confident you can be about the end result of the answer, really, because you have involved those people that need to be involved, which for our board, it's now the thing that they're most proud of. They go around talking to other organisations. When our chairman started as our chairman 4 years ago, he said, well, what's this youth advisory board? How does that work? So he went to meet with them, and he went back to his organisation, which is a big communications company, and tens of thousands of people worldwide. And he said, well, let's set up a youth advisory board. It's revolutionised his business. So I would say every single person that I talk to, I try and persuade them to think about involving the people that they involve in their business. So if you're a soap manufacturer, you want people who are using your soap, otherwise, and they have loads of focus groups. I don't think that's enough. I think if in society we can get more and more young people involved in organisations taking responsibility, then we will see that shift in society that we want.
Mr. Bast, you being the head of a large institution with lots of young people, how do you deal with them in decision making? What kind of formats and processes are in place that could involve and can involve the students in decision making in your institution?
Well, there is on the one hand the formal decision making from the Senate at the university level. Some 1/4 of the members are students. There is the institute level where some 1/3 of the decision making body are the students. Also on curricula, the curricular commission, 1/3 of them are students. So that's the formal level. At least as important, I think, is the informal level. So I spend a lot of my time with communication. Students in various stages of their studies come to me, present ideas, present projects. They have their own exhibition space, the space funded by the university, somewhere not in the very center, but kind of a periphery in the 5th district of Vienna, which became kind of a hotspot of fine arts in Vienna. They organize it themselves, all alone. They decide on curators, they decide on the program, they decide how they run the space. So these are the opportunities on the informal level, and I think also we always talk, and especially politicians, and we, with the politicians, talk about the formal level, the informal level, how you deal with people on the individual level or with groups of people who have ideas. This is an important thing to get a climate of innovation, of also taking risks. So running an off space with student art is quite a risk in these days in the arts scene, which is mainly dominated by economic interests. So we also stimulate students to take risks, to try things, and this is important. One of the most important experiences you can have at a university.
Just to bring you in, Michael, because I know that from working with you that this is a topic you feel very passionate about, engaging young people in the arts, engaging young people in decision making. Do you have any thoughts on that? Maybe how we can adapt such a model as the Roundhouse in Austria? Is that an opportunity? Is it a possibility?
Did you want to say that also? No, I was saying we have the WUK. You know, we have kind of, maybe do you want to jump in? No, come. I didn't want to fall into it, I'm sorry. But I think we have, and this maybe also fits to what you said, in Austria we have plenty of opportunities to, you know, we are such a well-established country with still very well-established structure, and I really also want to come to that because this was said from Kazakhstan and also Greece and you know, and also you said it because there are countries where you have like zero, which means zero, and it was also the talk on private and public. And I have another example maybe which I could bring from also somebody I worked with for years, which is Farid Farouz. This is a pseudonym. He's an artist and cultural manager in Bucharest, and he was the director of the National Dance Center for years there, and they really did a very, very important work because you know, Bucharest is kind of, there's not a lot. And they also have this remote museum. You research on remote museum. Parliament, so that the scene is completely divided on that because they really have this Ceausescu thing to work on. So anyway, they of the building, which they shared with the National Theatre, which is very specific in Bucharest because of the earthquake situation there, so they moved out in 2011. The center was closed, and now it was clear at that time when I talked to him, was clear it will not be open. The National Theatre will come back, and this is what happened now, and Mr. Klaus was visiting it, and they now are very proud because they have the biggest national theatre in India. They have the biggest museum, the biggest house of parliament, the biggest Orthodox church now. And they have 7 stages. And of course, the dance center, you know, this is also a periphery story, and it's for me the real problem in each country. And especially in Romania, is that it's so corrupt as you just can imagine, and that the power structures there, trying to talk about whole day, like what's the power structure and how can be power not abusive and how can a word be true. And how can a government with whom you talk, a cultural minister with whom you talk on Monday and gone 2 weeks later, so there's never anything you can rely on, and usually the companies which enter the country stay longer and you know, are more reliable partners in a way, and they what I think it was very good what you two talked, that there are many sometimes in England, you know. I mean, England and Kazakhstan, you know, as soon as you are in those countries, sorry for saying those countries, but you and you are happy that you receive money, and this is a complete different, very neoliberal term of dangerous cultural politics, of course. Maybe now.
Yeah, because Anke found me on the wrong side, maybe to be too generalizing, but Austria is in a tradition of a paternalist way of offering to the young people something. And when I was young in the 70s, there was an alternative movement and saying we are fed up of this kind of paternalism. There should be kind of self-organization. We want to do our own thing. We want to do our own cultural activities around. And this was the time when there had been a number of self-organized institutions, and WUK is maybe the most prominent one, still in a certain way alive, but there had been a number of others around, and they are gone meanwhile. What means that we are also talking in waves, I suppose, when it is easier or the forces are stronger to request that this kind of activities should be. I think it has to do with a general climate change, but it does not say that there are on micro level self-governing things around. And when you mentioned the gallery, Gerald, we are doing 3 or 4 times a year an exhibition at EDUCULT with the students of your house, also in the way that it's their place and it's them to organize from the beginning to the end. When I come to our activities of EDUCULT, we try to do participatory research. Also trying to bring in the young people and the experience of the young people. And here I would say we can take a lot of advantage. This has limitations, of course, when it's often us as the adult saying this is the issue we want to talk about, but starting from that and finding the interest of the young people, they can bring a lot with their curiosity, but also with their expertise, because their expertise of their everyday life, that's what they can bring in. This is quite a lot.
If you say it's a climate of paternalism in Austria, these seems to intend that there is a lot of opportunities for young people, and they are kind of tired on engagement and tired to engage in politics and things like that. I don't believe that. Maybe it's also hard for me to understand it, but maybe the fact that we in such a discussion don't have almost any student is a signal, but not for wonderful, welcome. You're saving the image of the students, but what I wanted to say, is they are thinking in what is politics, what is society, in a very different way than we do. We, let's say, our generation, Michael and me, we much more relied on institutions and on the fight against institutions. And nowadays, I have the feeling that the young generation is moving between institutions, or even sometimes neglecting institutions. They are not that interesting for them. They want to build up their own kind of structures. And that's the things which are interesting for them. And what we, and maybe you say, again, this is kind of paternalistic, what we should and what the society, and especially a rich society like Austria, should have to provide is infrastructure. Just had some discussions with politicians in Vienna and asked them, why do you have regulations on building houses which demand to have a certain amount of garage spaces? If you want to build a house, you have to provide a garage space. Why don't you make a regulation that everyone who builds a big complex of flats has to reserve 2 or 3 spaces for young creative people? This would change the whole atmosphere. This would change the whole climate of these new satellite towns we are building now in the north or in the east of Vienna. And they said, well, that's not me. That's one answer. That's not me. That's a private thing. And on the other hand, no, we cannot do that. That would raise the cost for the flats. But so we are talking about cultural policy. Sometimes I have the feeling that there is no cultural policy. It's just building an image of doing something like cultural policy. But in fact, if you look behind the surface, there is almost nothing.
One comment by Christian, and then we open up to the audience, to Marc Raumontagne.
Thank you. I found it really important that you asked the question to Michael, do you think it can work here? I think that's a very crucial question that we have to really bear in mind, because we're talking about the Roundhouse as a very interesting idea. We talk about including youth in boards of directors as something that we might like, but the question is also, is that something that could work across cultures? Because we can speak of cultural policy as a universalist concept, but there are actually very deeply ingrained cultural contexts that allow for certain cultural policies. And I would just like to refer to the context of Burkina Faso, where actually there is a very centralist notion of governance, where almost everything goes through the ministry. I've been speaking about very kind of bottom-up ideas with a lot of artists and aspiring entrepreneurs, and they were like, yes, we could do this, but we have to see the minister. I'm like, why would you have to see the minister to do this? You can just go to that space, arrange everything, and just do it. And then the answer was always, no, we cannot do that. We just cannot do that. For one reason, it's because that there is an idea that has to be done. I don't know where that comes from or why that is the case, but that seems to be very central to the way they approach the power of the ministry. But there's also a very real cultural element to it, that it is just absolutely, utterly insulting to contradict anyone who is older than you. And I'm exaggerating a little bit, but not very much. And I imagine that this is to quite an extent the same in Nigeria. As a young kid, you cannot walk up to your boss or your father or your older coworker and say, actually, I don't think that's a good idea because of this and that reason. You might be right, but you'll be wrong. And that's something that is really quite crucial in recognizing the culture of cultural policy. Because indeed, even when it's about just taking on the role of creating infrastructure, I know of several cases, again in Burkina Faso, where the government effectively focused on creating infrastructure. But they didn't listen to anyone. They created the most ugly, cheap, and ridiculous arts venues that are of absolutely no use. The acoustics are absolutely bad. There is no sense of what artists would want to do in these spaces because they didn't even think of listening to them. And there's a little sense that this is changing. There are some places in which they're claiming that right, and that to some extent it starts working. But there is really that culture that makes that engagement of the youth very difficult. Then on the other hand, it might be hopeful, I'm kind of hopeful that things are changing, because just half a year ago, in Burkina Faso again, a group of young people, led by musicians, actually ousted the president after being in power for 27 years. He wanted to change the constitution to run again this year, and they said, no, you're not going to do that. At first he said, there has never been a law that has been changed by a protest march, so this is not going to happen. So obviously he didn't really know history that well, and he was also proven wrong, because there was a major protest march, and they actually managed to oust him. And right now the country is in transition, largely driven by these young people that have artists as their spokespeople. So that's something that there might be some change going on, but we cannot ignore that the cultural context, and that's I don't know what the context is in Kazakhstan or what the context is in Romania, but it's something that is really part of the way we organize that intergenerational debate and deliberation, I would guess, somehow.
It's a comment. I find it very interesting where the discussion is going now, and going back to where we started this morning, the topic is about periphery and center, which is at the end of the day the question who's in and who's out. And if I try to sum up what I've been listening to in the last 20 minutes, the question is that perhaps there is one central challenge or a problem of cultural policy, no matter if it's in Kazakhstan, Turing, or Burkina Faso. It's about trust and confidence and communication. So, Markus, I think you said that for you is infrastructure, institutional building is about sharing power. And you said that you're busy the whole day with informal talks. So what we do is that rules and building infrastructure is a way of participating people and let them and share the power with them. So and that's what we, for example, did also in Turing in the rural regions. And after 1.5 years of the process, I had a very strong feeling that one thing is completely lacking in the process. It's a confidence. The confidence of the smaller communities and of the actor against the land of Turing. Because after years and years of decreasing funding, of more demography, of people going out of the country, there was just the feeling that there's only one rule in the country: no money, no funding, and we are not attractive. We are not. There's no, wie sagt man, Augenhöhe, no. Pardon? Yeah, there's a lack of respect of talking in one room about the same thing and being ready to share power. So I think that a big thing which can help to to establish perhaps an infrastructure for the future and solve the problems we have today is showing respect to communicate and really share power. And this is probably everywhere the same on the world. It doesn't matter if you live in a paternalistic Austria or in a paternalistic Germany or in Kazakhstan or wherever. So bring the people to the country and take them serious and try to find a way of let them participate in solving the problem.
As far as the cultural infrastructure, I feel that our government is building this cultural infrastructure in Astana like Egyptian pharaohs building the pyramids. It's just something, this is very, I don't know, that it should stay for years and show to the world how big Kazakhstan is. But the problem is that first they're building this huge infrastructure, and only then they're thinking, what are we going to do with that? What are we going to fill it with? And then they're just robbing all the museums in Kazakhstan and bringing all these art objects in this museum, and it's still like partially empty. And what I keep telling the artists I work with, that please stop waiting for something from our government. Just stop relying, and if it is great if they're giving you some support, But if you will leave and wait for this support, you won't do anything. So do what you do your small initiatives. Probably it will take you 10 more years, and the change of the generation, it will happen someday, but you need to do your thing, and please do not rely on anything except yourself. And it's been working for several years.
Michael, you want to...
This is half of the answer, because I understand what you are saying, but it's I doubt it in a certain way when it is a rather, again, normative concept. Let us share the power. It's those who are equipped with power who can say, I share, or I am prepared to share what's with the other side, and this is one of the answer. Just do it. Don't wait that when anybody is prepared to share this kind of... We are talking about power relations also in a process, what you said, but it's also about dependencies, and we have to take that into account. It's also about political concepts, and some are in conflict, I would say. Some you can find friends and networks and partners, but take into account it's about power relations.
You're fully right, so it was a bit imprecise. The idea of why there was a culture concept of participating was the power situation that the Land Thüringen has recognized that they could not longer make a top-down cut because they lack any form of legitimacy. So this is, of course, also a power instrument of distributing lack and finding a consensus of how to cut the money. So it is a dependency vice versa, but in this moment it's a chance also. That's what I wanted to say. So both sides come together.
In the morning there was much talk about processes of and re-territorialization and how boundaries and frontiers work. And thinking about that and also talking about political concepts, I'm wondering, and this is really a question to all basically, coming back to the issue of cultural policy and politics, is there any chance to envisage, or how would you envisage, transnational cultural policies? There are certain actors which are transnationally active. Most of them are private actors, foundations in many cases. There are attempts, or were attempts, also from the side of the European Union, and maybe in the early days of the culture program we were full of hope that could be interesting. Now it's Creative Europe, and it's basically a cultural industry program. So there is not much talk about power sharing or power relations in that. That's why I'm asking you. So is there any understanding or idea of a transnational cultural policy that we could work on?
I'm going to give the wrong answer because I'm a bit behind you. So I mentioned this thing called What Next earlier, and I would recommend having a look at it, What Next Culture. And as part of our weekly meeting, we've invited campaigners and people who are running movements from all around Europe to come and talk to us about what they've done outside the area of arts and culture. And also, I just wanted to make one other comment. We saw a little bit of a film about German football earlier, and that is a fantastic thing that's happened. I mean, I know almost nothing about football except the ball is round and it's about that big. But my sons, who are 6 and 9, know a hell of a lot more about it. And in the World Cup, when they were supporting Germany, I knew something had changed. And the thing that had changed was that the German team had gone completely back to grassroots. They had involved the community. They had invested at grassroots. And the reason why Ozil is more famous to my son than a musician or an artist is because it had a cultural impact on us. And we have so much to learn from outside our own world. And our own world, we look more and more inward, actually, I think, rather than we should be looking more and more outward and learning from other sectors of society what's worked well. So, give an example. The gaming industry, computer games, and I've never played a computer game, in Britain is massive. The person who went to government and said, look, this needs to be part of the curriculum, coding needs to be part of the curriculum, and everyone went, no, it's absolutely ridiculous. The coding must be mad. And then he just systematically worked through it and got it to be part of the curriculum. This was at the expense, again, of arts subjects, because we hadn't got our act together to prove to government that actually arts and culture were a good idea. Even so, he's now the biggest advocate of arts and culture because he says science and arts together will lead us. Steve Jobs said exactly the same thing when, Apple, everyone knows the story, sitting around with a group of artists and Apple comes out the other end. But we can learn so much more from other sectors. And I'm sorry, I'm going to have to let somebody else answer your question.
We haven't really talked about aesthetics yet, and I'd like to come back to something that someone said earlier. It was like the culture sector and the arts world has really perfectionized creating distinctions between spotlight and darkness, and it's really the mere staging is sort of creating distinctions between center and periphery. And I'd just like to throw up that question, what kind of new aesthetic formats sort of could overcome these distinctions and create more relations? Of course, there are outreach programs, but maybe you have ideas about other formats that are more interactive between audience and what's happening on stage, or the artist as creator and the audience as the visitor, as mere spectator.
Maybe I could try to connect your question with your question, because I cannot really answer that, but it sounds participatory. It sounds like you want to, have the either Brecht or a participatory format in some kind of way, and like the transnational cultural, was it politics or was it action? Because I think you said it like the other formats, and I think it was also said when we thought about WUK and things like that now there are different formats. So I believe and you said that artists just have to go on, just go on, and so I think it's kind of a mix of all that, because of course we all know that like in the outfit there's an international thing going around the globe constantly, all the curators, all the biennials, those are of course, I believe, cultural policy networks. They create a policy, they create a discourse, and they do nothing else than gebetsmühlenartig, make this discourse and ask themselves, as we are part of that right now in a way, but we opened up more, so we are more into cultural politics, which is then not arts. And these networks and these other formats, I think that the young people now, and we wanted that so badly to have the new media, which is not new anymore now, but all the crowdfunding, all these different formats of new alliances, I think it's also part of that. And, making a cultural power and a cultural policy, and it's usually cross-border. And I think that especially young people and also artists move more than we all would imagine, also because they have to earn money outside their country. I mean, if you are, I don't know, in Serbia, you will not earn money with art, but if you go for a residency in Germany, you will get some money, or in Vienna. And then in the end, it's the question to the artists or to the people involved in the art field, how long will be their breath? Because there's also, I think you were talking about Burkina Faso, there's a lot of energy if the revolution just happened. But if the revolution is like 20 years ago, I experienced that like in Romania and especially in Romania, because it's such a, bad atmosphere there. They were like, there was power. There was like, yeah, we do it. It's just what we do, and this is this kind of small-scale thing. But then now it's kind of, you get really tired by being not visible, not recognized, always out, bringing money in. So, yeah. And one last example, which I wanted to say on cross-border thing, like for me was kind of, we have Greece here, and I was actually wondering that you didn't say it. When Adam Simcik took the Athens Biennial as his second leg, besides Kassel, I thought like, this is also a standpoint change of a periphery, because suddenly Athens belongs to Germany in a way. In the outfield, it's now kind of, it's very close. Maybe you look like you doubt it, but in the outfield, it is like that. This. Yeah.
Maybe I can just briefly explain that what I was thinking about mentioning the foundations, for example. We do know that many of them either follow old colonial lines or imperial patterns, or accompany neo-colonial mechanisms. So this is one thing that is just a fact. The other fact is that there is networking. And the third element is like independent actors very often under very, very precarious conditions. And then there is, of course, a global market. So I do feel there is a lack of cultural policies and visions for transnational cultural policies that take up those facts and kind of try to envisage something new, perhaps. Considering issues such as democratic citizenship, participation, things that we have been talking about. Sorry.
I think I just want to kind of respond to this idea of a transnational policy. As coming from a continent that is developing, we have, and most of us have come out of some kind of colonial construct. We are we've been wounded by policies that have come in because they're not contextualized at all. So when you try and bring about a transnational policy, what happens is that because the country itself is suffering from issues of poverty, issues of lack of education, lack of power, maternal mortality, child mortality. When you come with a policy, they're very quick to accept it as being the right thing to do, and tend not to sit back and say, let us try and contextualize this for ourselves. So what you then have is further increasing this dichotomy where this is right and this is wrong, and further having this exchange of power where you start to, these peripheries, being countries that are assuming transnational policies, start to negotiate power, but then in the sense lose power because they have no structure to protect them. So I'll be a little careful about this idea of a transnational policy, because countries that are not used to developing their own policy, but more of looking at best practices, would tend to assume that as what is right, as opposed to locally enriching what is already in place, or locally looking at what's going on and building on that. So, yeah.
I accept what you were saying, that in different countries there are different cultures to be taken into account. But following our discussion, I become insecure if nation still is the main mean of differentiation, or if there are others. And it's talking about the awareness that we are different in terms of social backgrounds, of cultural, ethnic, religious, whatsoever. And then this transnational aspect is among us. And the first round is to accept that we are different as a prerequisite to find networking and cooperating also. bridging these differences. And if we go in this direction, then I think having new aesthetic approaches is the answer. Because you accept different backgrounds bringing in what we are doing also artistically. And there is a second point that goes beyond and maybe combines both. This is simply the digital media. They go beyond national borders on one hand, and they offer a new way of interactivity. They are not the solution, but within this new media, a lot of interaction, and by that also new aesthetic representations are built. And then I would follow you that what we call official cultural policy has not yet experienced that there is something considerably happening within that. It's just quite outside and mainly dealing with the traditional institutions and all that. But we didn't talk very much about this dimension, but talking about young people, I think, means also talking about digital media.
Yeah. It's the whole point we've not discussed. It's the point we've not discussed today, and it's also the thing that we can't communicate what we've been discussing today. There's no hashtag. We are Twitter-free zone, which is so rare. It's really nice. I'm really sorry, but the microphone doesn't work.
The microphone, this works. Okay.
Okay, is that better? So we're a Twitter-free zone, and that's actually quite nice. But it means that you're right, because the first young board member we appointed was actually from Nigeria, and she's moved back to Nigeria. And but she, I know, is in regular contact with people at the Roundhouse, and regularly in contact with people in Nigeria and in other countries through Twitter, through Facebook, through whatever other forms. So actually, we're the generation, those that are sitting around here, who are not tweeting about this conversation, which I have been, and that are, it just feels like we're a different generation. We are feeling like a different generation because we are not socializing our communications. We're not trying to understand other perspectives. We're not bringing them others into this conversation. And that's what my experience of young people is all the time. They're experiencing a million different things all at the same time. And you can see how society is going like that. It's just moving forward. And it's really interesting to see. I don't know what that means in 10, 20 years' time, but it's going to be different.
You have two more points, Mr. Bast.
Yeah, I just wanted to add like one tiny remark about this whole shift to the digital as well, because I do agree that we haven't really been tweeting, that's one part, but the other part is that many digital media aren't really that transnational. I don't know if any one of you has recently been to Germany and tried to watch some music on YouTube. You notice that because the German collective management organization, GEMA, doesn't have a full agreement with YouTube, a lot of music content is entirely blocked in Germany on YouTube. The moment you step outside of the country, you have full access again, but it's blocked in Germany. More worryingly, in Turkey right now, YouTube is also blocked. Even before the crisis started in Syria, you couldn't access Facebook. If you try to use your account on Netflix in a country that doesn't offer Netflix, it will just say, you don't have access to this content, even though you are a subscribing member. You pay for that. But if you're on a holiday in a country that doesn't have that agreement, you cannot access what you have paid for. So in that sense, you have all these kind of geo-blocking of digital services that completely undermine the actual potential of these digital media as being transnational or global. Well, but the thing is, interestingly, most commonly that policy falls under communications and media or intellectual property and not under culture, which is, again, a part of a much bigger debate, I would argue.
I think our culture minister is the minister for digital as well. It's the same person.
Well, sometimes it is, but often or most commonly it's not.
But you have to add to that there are certain reasons why they aren't working. Think about the Arab Revolution, which is also labeled as the Facebook or Twitter revolution. So actually, governments are afraid of those tools, which have proven very powerful, and that's why they suspended them.
Well, that's the very point. The real borders we face are not borders of nationality, are not borders of different cultures, but they are very much borders of economic interests. And the main thing and the main problem we all have in these discussions about cultural policy is that if we even can talk about cultural policies, just take the example of European Union, in fact, they understand it as economic policy. You mentioned some of the European Union so-called cultural programs. Culture only has the right to exist, and to creative people only have the right to promote their projects if they can prove that there is some contribution to economic progress. That's the point. And here I want to add to you, I understand your situation and your mood from your experience you have, but I wouldn't accept that. I wouldn't say, leave politics alone and do your thing. I wouldn't let politics out of their responsibility for society. Or if we would be consequent, we should say, okay, leave politics at all, and then disappear all politics and give the power officially to the economic institutions. And then we wouldn't have any need for government on the national or the European level. Give the total power to the World Economic Forum, for example. That would be consequent. But I wouldn't do that. I'm an optimist from my mood. I would say, as long as I could try to have an hope, yeah. Yes, of course.
So why are you that optimistic, if I may ask?
Because it's not signed so far. Yeah. Yeah, but what's the point? Lean back and say, leave the world, and everyone is going to become an hermit, going out to his own ivory tower and give up the idea of a social existence. So I am deeply convinced that we have to fight, and I will explain what I mean with fight, for a continuation of enlightenment. And we have to fight for the ideas of human rights, for the ideas of freedom and solidarity. And the main point and the main instrument for these fight, in my opinion, are the arts. And therefore, I would say, don't know if I will be quoted next day, that we have to educate kind of cultural guerrillas in our societies.
It's interesting what's happening now that the state cultural institutions, there is a huge stagnation happening because nothing is really happening there. There's no management, there is no artistic content. And what is happening in these cultural institutions, state cultural institutions, is starting slowly to come to approach these independent cultural initiatives and kind of saying, what are you doing here? Oh, okay, they're probably interesting. Well, actually we have a stage, and probably, but only in the evening and only on Monday, you could do this play in our institution. So it's just like a first encounter between the aliens and the other aliens. So it's interesting what will happen, but my point is that these two, at the first sight, the parallel universe, they cannot live without each other. So either artists will somehow work and integrate with the political state cultural policy, or the cultural policy and the state will in some point be talking to these independent artists, because they just can't live without each other.
I just want to say that due to the recession, but not only because of the recession, in the European Union, I see that in Greece, we're trying to persuade artists to become managers, and we're having incubators and hubs, and we're teaching them how to make business plans and things like that. If 10 years ago somebody was going to say that, you know, culture is something that has to have an economic value and you have to have economic to gain money out of it, it would be ridiculous. I mean, it could be, nobody would accept it. Now we all accept it. I don't know, I think that this transition has already begun, and I don't know if we can stop it. We're trying to persuade us, the people from the ministries, our governments, that culture has an economic value, and we're thinking in economic terms. And that's not good for culture, to be honest.
I think everyone is sort of, getting a bit tired. So I don't know, Michael, what do you think? Should we have a final round of statements of the panel? Okay, maybe, yeah, starting with you and then ending with you, Michael, and rounding up. Okay.
Well, actually, I totally agree with you, and of course with you also. The consequence I would draw is not to withdraw from what is shaping our society, but the consequence is to bring back and to use all possibilities of the arts, of different forms of art, to bring back the arts in the center of our societies again. What we are facing now, you mentioned the tour of biennials and exhibitions all over around the globe. We are used to see that and visit that, and we all will meet in 2 weeks in Venice probably, and we of course we educate our students to be able to survive in this system of cultural industry, and I think this is necessary. This is also my responsibility as head of an institution of art education. But on the other hand, I always say, and we will, as our institution will increase that we will focus more than we did this so far to bring the arts at spaces which are not the so-called temples of the arts, which are actually economic temples of the art industry. So we have to bring the arts back in the streets, in the backyards of the cities, in the peripheries, whatever this means. And not only in the city peripheries, but also in the peripheries of the globe. So we do already, and we started that already 10 years ago. We had workshops where we sent students and teachers to Damascus at times as this was possible. Working with people in refugee camps, working with local non-official artists. We sent people to Mexico. We have to increase it. We worked in several places in Africa, and we still do that. this is our responsibility not only to focus on these sacred places of the arts, but also really as kind of a cultural guerrilla, go into places where people are and live who are not used to go and visit art galleries, museums, concert halls and things like that, for various reasons. This is our responsibility, and I believe in that mission, otherwise I wouldn't be able to do my job anymore.
I would just like to make a minor point about that kind of colonizing force of economic policy on cultural policy, by basically stating that as much as we all seem to disagree with that, at least to some extent, this is not something that is strictly the case in the cultural sector. That colonizing force of economic thinking and policy also applies to the way we see the environment. We've economically quantified our carbon emissions in order to trade them. We have quantified the value of our forests, of everything that we were starting to really value everything in terms of money. And while that is often a useful way to actually balance certain things and to actually calculate what is going on, we shouldn't be driven by that. And I think that one of the real tensions that is present in that notion of arts and culture as an industry is that we've, in the defense of the sector, we have largely reduced the sector to that industry. And I don't mind seeing the arts and culture as an industry because it's organized that way. But it's not only that. It's not the main defense of the sector. And that's what I was trying to say this morning when I said that cultural policy is peripheral to public policy in general. But that's not a problem as such. It should really embrace that peripheral role and say, actually, we are peripheral to that central element of economic policy, but we have something else that we're striving for, and we have another raison d'être. And that's the thing that we're going to develop a better discourse around and develop better arguments about, that we can actually get into debate with people within the cultural sector, but also beyond that. See what they think about the way we frame things and how we can actually learn from each other to come up with a discourse that we can actually be happy with, that we can say, actually, this is something that we absolutely believe in, that we can share with other public policy levels, and that we can rightly defend. We can say, this is something that is absolutely important. Not simply economic, not simply saying art is great, but something that goes beyond that. And then cultural policy will still be peripheral, but it will also be central to the discussions that we're having when it comes to the creation of art, to the preservation of heritage, and to the creation of identities.
Yes, you're totally right, excuse me, but we also have to give those people who promote this total economic power scene, we have to give them a reason to stop that, or at least the politicians to give them a reason to stop that. Because I'm totally convinced if there will be a situation, if there would be a situation where the only value is the shareholder value, and we are very near from this point, this system and even the system of the economic system would collapse. It immediately would collapse in very short time, because also and even the economic system is in some case relaying and dependent from these other values they are actually fighting now. So these are the things we have to lay on the table and to convince people with.
Okay. We're quite used to it. In Britain, we've had this for 30 years. We've had to justify ourselves economically, and we've followed the people who pay us. And over the last 3 to 5 years, the conversation has changed. We're not having that conversation all the time about economic value. And even the Chancellor, who is quite right-wing, conservative, is talking about humanity and arts and culture. And the Labour Party have put it at the centre of their manifesto, arts and culture. Those are certain people, but it has meant that things have shifted. It's amazing. My feeling, part of the conversation today, is that being on the periphery is a psychological state, as well as is being in a certain physical situation. We are representing artists, we represent communities, and what we do is tell stories. We need to tell stories better. We need to tell stories better. To answer your question, we need to be politicians to be able to tell the stories that we tell. We need young people to tell those stories for us. We need artists and we need audience members to tell those stories more powerfully, because they would tell them more powerfully because they are the recipients. They are not the people who are being paid to put them on in the first place. So I'm going to finish with a story of hope. So, 15 or 20 years ago, a young lecturer from Limerick University in Ireland was sitting at the back of a Ryanair flight in a very cheap seat. Next to him was a man, an American guy, in a cheap suit, cheap shoes, and a cheap watch. And the American guy said, "Hi, so how you doing?" He said, "Yeah, I'm great, but, I work in Limerick University. It's completely on the periphery of everywhere. It's a dump. There's no investment, there's no money in Ireland to support it. It's never going to go anywhere, and I am passionate about it because there are people there who are passionate, and we believe it should be the best university, not only in Ireland, but in the world." And this guy said, "Oh, tell me more." So he started telling him more, tell me more. The guy he was talking to was a guy called Chuck Feeney. He invented duty-free stores. He's worth £10 billion. He is Irish descent, American. He believed that he should go economy class and have cheap clothes and have a small flat because it wasn't his money. He wanted to give it all away. How did he know? So this is a story of hope, to keep telling the stories. So €2 billion later pumped into Limerick University. It's completely rebuilt, concert halls, universities, wings, facilities. I can see the envy in your eyes. Keep telling the stories. You never know who you're going to sit next to. And the university is built, and it is a great university. So my thing is, you never know who you're talking to. Tell the story. And that guy was a junior lecturer who was just passionate about what he does. Enable those people who are passionate about what they do to share in the power so that they can tell the stories. Because if they can tell the stories, you'll succeed. You've got a microphone. That's me.
Yeah, this was such a nice story. I feel like I don't even have anything to add to that.
Just go on.
Yeah, one thing which you said, it was the difference. I'm kind of happy that the term, just to come back to that, the terminology, that the differentiation came into our round also, because I actually forgot about it, because it was for me important in the beginning, that also for the periphery, this is a moment of differentiation, and it's another expression of the same in a way, but it's a more powerful term in a way, because if you are able to differentiate yourself without, I come back with the fear of power or of anything, then you are in a good position. So this is maybe kind of the same thing, that you stand to yourself. And I don't want to be here the one which is kind of individualizing things, because this is another dangerous, we all know it's always a dangerous position wherever you go. But yeah, maybe there's hope. It was a nice story. Ryanair is bankrupt, isn't it? You cannot fly with it anymore, I think.
No, it's really successful.
It's really successful, so we have to book ourselves on Ryanair.
Thank you. I think it was also you in one of the breaks. You reminded me that there is need to differentiate between arts policy and cultural policy. and in the end of this meeting, I have the impression that we all agree that there is no cultural policy per se, is a single issue. Instead of that, it's something transdisciplinary, transdisciplinary when it deals with media issues, with urban development, education, things like that. And so it's also about the involvement in social processes. It's about the society as a whole, and in a certain way we come back to ideas of cultural policy of the 70s and 60s, but under new circumstances. And beside that, you have to see arts policy as state intervention, make the realization of artists, and then they can decide whether to become guerrilleros somewhere or storytellers whatsoever. So it's then a particular job intervening with their professional capacities as artists and being part of that. Saying that, I hope you could take some ideas we were discussing. I know this was quite a broad range of different approaches. Maybe tomorrow we know better what we have talked about. But before giving back to you, Anke, I would also want to thank the technicians who were with us the whole day, and also Anya and Yasmin for all the support that made that possible. And most of all, thank you that you are still here.
So there's not much to add to that. Just one thing. I think there's a publication also sort of in planning with more contributions, more maybe giving the speakers of today the opportunity to sort of elaborate on what has been said today. So yeah, we will keep you informed. The university will also keep you informed. Thank you very much. And I think what we've learned today, sort of that peripheries and centers is it's as much real as it is a state of mind. And so wherever you go, wherever you decide to go, wherever you have to go, whether it's your personal periphery or your personal center, good luck and have a safe way.